The day Pinnacle Dynamics announced it was shutting down its Longmont facility, 47 people received a termination letter by email at 9:04 in the morning, while they were already sitting at their desks, coffee going cold, monitors on. One person did not receive that email. His name was Joseph Takeda. He was 53 years old, and he had been working the overnight quality inspection shift for 14 months without once being introduced to anyone above his immediate supervisor, a man named Dennis who called him the Japanese guy, not out of malice but out of the particular incuriosity that characterizes people who do not bother to learn the names of people they consider beneath notice. Joseph was not Japanese. He was third-generation Japanese-American, born in Westminster, Colorado, raised by a father who had spent 31 years calibrating precision instruments at a defense contractor and a mother who ran the bookkeeping for 4 small businesses simultaneously and taught both her children that the most important thing you could bring to any room was accuracy. His family had been in Colorado for 60 years. He spoke with the flat, open vowels of the Front Range. He had never in his adult life corrected the people who called him the Japanese guy, because correcting them would have required more energy than he was willing to give, and because the correction never changed anything. The reason Joseph's email never arrived was simple, and it revealed something important about Pinnacle Dynamics that nobody in leadership had thought to check. Joseph Takeda was not in the HR system. He had been hired 14 months ago by a department head who had since left the company. The paperwork had been filed in the old system. The transition to the new HR platform the previous spring had not migrated the overnight inspection records correctly. Joseph had continued to show up, clock in, do his work, clock out, and receive his paychecks, which came from a payroll vendor that ran on a separate system, without anyone in the main organizational infrastructure knowing he existed. He was, in the language of corporate systems, a ghost. He learned about the layoffs the way the rest of the world learned. His neighbor texted him a link to a news article at 9:30 in the morning, just as Joseph was getting home from his overnight shift. He stood in his driveway in Longmont. It was October. The mountains to the west were starting to go gold at the tree line. And he read the article on his phone. He read it twice. Then he went inside and slept, because he was a man who had learned over 53 years that the problems that needed solving were still there after you slept, and that sleep was not avoidance but maintenance. When he woke up at 3 in the afternoon, he made tea, sat at his kitchen table, and thought. His first thought was practical. Did he still have a job? His second thought was also practical. If he did, what did that mean? His third thought was the one that would change everything. Why had they not sent him the letter? He drove to the facility. The parking lot was half empty in the particular way of places that have just had their soul removed. The cars of the few remaining staff scattered randomly across spaces that had been full that morning. The security guard at the front let him in without comment. Joseph walked through the main floor, which was operating at perhaps a third of normal capacity, the hum of machinery lower and the lighting somehow already feeling dimmer than yesterday. He went to his station. He clocked in. He began his work. He was there for 40 minutes before anyone noticed. The person who noticed was the CEO. Her name was Catherine Marsh, and she had arrived at the Longmont facility that afternoon from the Denver headquarters with the particular controlled grimness of a leader moving through a disaster of her own making. The acquisition of Pinnacle Dynamics had been her initiative. The integration had failed on her watch. The restructuring, 47 layoffs, the shuttering of the facility's secondary production line, was the result of decisions she had made and would spend a long time thinking about. She was walking the floor with the head of operations when she saw a man at the quality inspection station in Bay 6, working at his normal pace with his normal focus, as if nothing had happened. "Who is that?" she said. The head of operations did not know. She approached. Joseph looked up. He had the calm, measuring eyes of someone who has spent years looking at things very closely and has learned to see precisely what is there rather than what he expected to find. "Are you supposed to be here?" Catherine said. She did not mean it dismissively. She was genuinely asking. I work the overnight quality inspection, Joseph said. My shift starts at 6. I came in early. What's your name? Joseph Takeda. Catherine looked at the head of operations, who was already on his phone checking the employee list. He shook his head. Joseph was not on the list. You weren't included in today's notification, Catherine said carefully. No, Joseph said. I noticed that. And you came in anyway. My shift starts at 6, Joseph said again, simply, as if this settled the matter, which in his understanding of the world, it did. Catherine Marsh had been a CEO for 9 years. She had managed layoffs twice before, both smaller than this one, both painful in the way that collective human suffering is always painful regardless of its necessity. She had spent this particular day delivering words that diminished the professional identities of 47 people, and she had done it carefully and with as much dignity as the circumstances permitted. She was tired in a way that went deeper than the body, and here was a man who had clocked in because his shift started at 6. Mr. Takeda, she said, can I ask you something? Sure. Why did you come in? Joseph set down the calibration tool he was holding. He thought about the question with the seriousness it deserved. Because the line is still running, he said. Third shift runs through tomorrow morning. The tolerances on the 7mm housing component have been drifting for 6 weeks. If someone isn't watching the calibration sequence, you get a 0.4% error rate that compounds over a full production run. I have the notes. A silence. You have notes? Catherine said. 14 months of shift logs, Joseph said. I keep them on my own because the system log doesn't capture the interstitial calibration data. Dennis thought it was excessive. But I found 3 component failure patterns in the logs that the system didn't flag. Catherine looked at the head of operations again. He was staring at Joseph with an expression that was moving rapidly from confusion toward something more complicated. Can I see those logs? Catherine said. I'll get them, Joseph said. Tell us in the comments where in the world you are listening to this story from. If HeartLine Stories has moved you today, please like, subscribe, and share this channel. Every subscriber tells us to keep bringing stories like this. Now, back to what Joseph Takeda's 14 months of invisible, meticulous work was about to reveal. The logs were in a binder, a physical binder, the kind nobody used anymore, organized by week and cross-referenced by component batch number. Joseph had developed his own shorthand for recording calibration drift, a system of notations that looked like an unfamiliar language at first and revealed itself, under examination, to be a model of compressed precision. Catherine took the binder to the conference room. She sat with the head of operations and the head of quality for 2 hours. At the end of 2 hours, the head of quality, a woman named Renata who had spent 20 years in manufacturing and had the no-nonsense directness of someone who has seen every species of production failure, looked up from the logs and said, He found the flange assembly drift pattern. We've been chasing that for 4 months. It's in here. Week 23. She showed Catherine the entry. The date was 7 weeks ago. Joseph had noted the anomaly, tracked its progression over 3 subsequent shifts, calculated the projected failure threshold, and written in his cramped, precise handwriting. Recommend immediate review of flange assembly tolerance spec. Current drift trajectory will breach critical threshold within 6 to 8 weeks. Have not been able to reach quality department for follow-up. 6 to 8 weeks ago, that note had been written. No one had seen it. No one had known to look. The flange assembly failure had been identified as a contributing factor in the production line underperformance that had in part informed the decision to restructure the facility. It had been estimated to have cost approximately $2 million in rework and delayed shipments. The answer had been in a binder. Catherine went back to Base 6 at 8 o'clock that evening. Joseph was at his station. The facility was quieter than it had ever been. The overnight crew reduced now to a skeleton operation. The machines ran with the particular muted efficiency of a place that was winding down. She sat on the stool across from his station, the kind of stool that was there for supervisors who never used it. And she said, "Walk me through your notes, from the beginning." He did. It took an hour and 40 minutes. He was precise and unhurried, and he did not editorialize or perform or shade anything. He described what he had seen, when he had seen it, what he had measured, what it meant. He had the vocabulary of deep competence. Not the vocabulary of someone performing knowledge, but of someone who had it so thoroughly that explanation was simply description. When he was done, Catherine was quiet for a moment. "How long have you been doing this kind of work?" she said. "Precision quality inspection. 26 years. Before Pinnacle, defense contractor in Westminster, aerospace components. The tolerances there are a fraction of what you're running here. After they downsized the division, I applied here. For the overnight shift." "It was what was available," he said, simply. Catherine thought about the 47 people who had received letters that morning. She thought about the systems that had made Joseph invisible for 14 months. She thought about the binder. "Mr. Takeda," she said, "I owe you a significant apology. This company failed to see you for 14 months because of its own administrative incompetence. I'd like to correct that, if you're willing to let me." Joseph looked at her for a moment. He had the stillness of a man who has learned not to need validation from people who have failed to notice him, but who can receive an honest apology without armor. "What are you proposing?" he said. What Catherine proposed, and what became reality over the following 6 weeks, was that Joseph be formally integrated into the company's quality systems architecture. Not as an overnight inspector, as the Director of Quality Standards with responsibility for designing the documentation and calibration monitoring systems that the Longmont facility should have had from the beginning. The facility, it turned out, was not being shut down after all. The restructuring had been a reduction, painful, real, and not entirely avoidable, but the line itself was viable, and the flange assembly issue, now that it was properly identified and documented, was fixable. Catherine had revised her assessment in the 3 days following her conversation with Joseph. Joseph accepted the position. He asked for one thing, that the overnight inspection team, which had been cut to 2 people, be restored to 4. He explained precisely why 4 was the number required for adequate coverage. Catherine approved it. He moved to a daytime schedule. His son, who was 27 and worked in software in Boulder and had spent 3 years gently urging his father to find a job that respected him, drove down to Longmont on a Thursday to take Joseph out to dinner. They ate at a place on Main Street where the pasta was made from scratch and the windows faced the mountains. "Why didn't you just quit?" his son asked. "When nobody was paying attention, when Dennis kept calling you the wrong thing. Why did you stay?" Joseph thought about it. He turned his fork over in his hands the way he turned instruments over, slowly, feeling for what was there. "Because the work needed doing," he said, "and I knew how to do it. Those 2 things are enough?" His son looked at him across the table for a long moment. "That's either the most Japanese-American thing I've ever heard," his son said, "or the most dad thing I've ever heard." "Probably both," Joseph said. They laughed. Outside, the mountains were dark against a darkening sky, and the lights of Longmont were coming on one by one, small and steady and everywhere, the way lights look when you're warm inside and the night is settling in, and everything that needed doing today has been done. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that invisible work is never truly invisible to the people who know how to look, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you have a story of your own, write to us at HeartLine Stories, @gmail.com. Every heart has a story worth telling. This is HeartLine Stories, where yours matters.